a serial killer who not only sexually assaulted his victims, but also inflicted unimaginable pain on them. But it didn't end there. After tormenting his victims, he would take them to a desolate area or a forest to play a deadly game of life and death. He would tell his victims to run, often stripping some women naked and forcing them to flee. As they ran, he would hunt them down as if they were wild animals. Who was this serial killer? What was his story? And how did he meet his end? We will uncover all of this in today's video. But before we begin, if you're visiting our channel True Crime Tales for the first time, make sure to subscribe. On this channel, you'll find fascinating true crime stories. So now let's dive into the story. On May 19, 1980, 24-year-old Joanne Messina, a local topless dancer, went out for dinner with a man in Seward, Alaska. She was accompanied by her dog. However, after that night, Joanne Messina was never seen again. A missing person report was filed, and the police began searching for her. Despite their efforts, the police could not find any evidence. Then on July 8, 1980, her body, which had severely decomposed, was found. The body had been badly damaged by wild animals. Messina had been shot with a .22 caliber revolver. 2 bullets had been fired at Joanne Messina, and her dog had also been shot. Police found Messina's belongings in the woods. The police were searching for the killer and questioning people, but they could not find any clues. The police were still struggling with Joanne Messina's case, as no clues were being found. Just then, the police discovered the body of another young woman. On July 21, 1980, in the city of Anchorage, Alaska, near the Eklutna area, police discovered the buried body of a young woman in a forest about a mile off South Eklutna Lake Road, near a power line. The body was found in a shallow grave near Eklutna Lake Road, but it was severely decomposed due to animal attacks. The victim was identified as Eklutna Annie. Her body showed stab wounds on her back, indicating she had been killed with a knife. Forensic evidence revealed that the woman had been sexually assaulted and subjected to severe abuse before her death. Further investigation uncovered that she had come to Alaska from California. However, her true identity remains unknown to this day. Sherry Morrow, a 23-year-old topless dancer, told her friends on November 17, 1981, that she was going to meet a photographer who had promised her $300 for nude pictures. However, she was never seen again. Nearly a year later, on September 12, 1982, hunters discovered a shallow grave near the banks of the Kenai River, close to Anchorage. The remains were identified as those of Morrow, who had been reported missing the previous year. Investigations revealed that she had been shot 3 times in the back, and the cartridges found near the body indicated that a .223 Ruger Mini 14 hunting rifle had been used in the attack. During the investigation, an unusual detail emerged. Although her body was found fully clothed, there were no bullet holes in the clothes. The evidence suggested that Morrow had been shot while naked, and after her death, she was dressed and then buried. Robert Yunt was on his way to work on the morning of June 13, 1983, driving his truck down the road. Suddenly, a girl ran into the middle of the street right in front of his truck. She was very scared and was shouting, "Help me! Help me!" Yunt noticed that her clothes were torn, both her hands were handcuffed, and she was barefoot, with no shoes on. There were visible signs of injuries on her face. Yunt immediately understood that something terrible had happened to this girl. He stopped his truck and opened the door, at which point the girl jumped into the truck, screaming, "He's going to kill me!" After that, Robert drove the truck away from the spot and took her to a nearby mission. As soon as they arrived at the mission, the girl jumped out of the truck and ran inside. Once inside, she begged the clerk to let her call her boyfriend at the Big Timber Motel. Yunt also went to his job, but he called the police to report the incident. When officers from the Anchorage Police Department APD arrived at the mission, they were informed that the girl had taken a taxi to the Big Timber Motel. The APD officers arrived there and found Paulson in room number 110. She was still handcuffed and alone. She was taken to the APD headquarters. When the police asked the girl for her name, she identified herself as Cindy Paulson. The police then asked Sydney who had done this to her. Cindy replied, "Robert Hansen did this to me." When Sydney revealed the whole truth about Robert Hansen, A horrifying reality came to light. Before we uncover the disturbing truth about Robert Hansen, let's first learn who Robert Hansen was. Robert Hansen was born on February 15, 1939, in Esterville, Iowa. He was the oldest of two children. His mother, Edna Margaret Hansen, was American, and his father, Chris Hansen, was Danish. His father worked as a local baker. The family moved to Richmond, California in 1942, but they returned to Iowa in 1949 and settled in Pocahontas. As a child, Hansen was very shy, had a stutter, and struggled with severe acne that left scars. He was often described as a quiet loner who didn't get along well with his strict father. To escape, Hansen took up hunting and archery, which became hobbies he enjoyed. In 1957, he joined the United States Army Reserve and served for 1 year before being discharged. Afterward, he worked as an assistant drill instructor at a police academy in Pocahontas. During this time, he began dating a younger woman, and they got married in the middle of 1960. On December 7, 1960, Hansen was arrested for burning down a school bus garage in Pocahontas County, Iowa, as revenge for not being popular in high school. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison and served 20 months at Anamosa State Penitentiary. While in prison, Hansen was diagnosed with manic depression and occasional schizophrenic episodes. The psychiatrist said Hansen had an infantile personality and was obsessed with getting revenge on people he felt had wronged him. During this time, his wife filed for divorce. Over the next few years, Hansen was arrested multiple times for small thefts. In 1967, he moved to Anchorage, Alaska, with his second wife, whom he had married in 1963, and their 2 children. In Anchorage, Hansen was liked by his neighbors and set several local hunting records. On June 13, 1983, Hansen offered 17-year-old Sandy Paulson $200 so that he has oral sex. When she got into the car, he took out a gun and put it on Cindy's head, and he took Cindy to his house at gunpoint, which was at Muldoon. There he imprisoned Sandy and repeatedly raped and tortured her. Sandy later told police that Benson chained her to a pole in his basement by the neck, so he slept on the nearby couch. When he woke up, he put Cindy in his car and drove her to Merrillfield Airport, where he told her he was taking her to his cabin, located in the Nick River area of the Matanuska-Susitna Valley. The cabin could only be accessed by boat or plane. Paulson, who was sitting in the back seat of the car with handcuffs on her hands, took advantage of the moment when Hansen was placing items in the cockpit of his plane. As soon as Hansen went into the plane, Cindy quickly got out of the back seat, opened the driver's side door, and started running towards 60th Avenue. While running, she reached the road and saw a truck. She asked the truck driver for help, and the driver took her to the Mushin Motel. Paulson later told the police that she had left her blue sneakers behind to provide evidence that she had been in Hansen's car. While answering questions from police officers, Hansen denied Paulson's accusations. He claimed she was lying and trying to harass him because he had rejected her extortion demands. Hansen used this excuse several times in the future. Although his past had clashed with the law, his mild nature, a small job at a bakery, and the testimony provided by John Henning led the police to not consider him a serious suspect. Glenn Floth, who was a detective with the Alaska State Troopers, was part of a team investigating the discovery of several bodies in the Anchorage, Seward, and Matanuska-Susitna Valley areas. The first body was found by construction workers near the Eklutna Road. The body was named Eklutna Annie by the investigators, and her identity has never been determined. Later that year, the body of Joanna Messina was found near a gravel pit close to Seward, and in 1982, the remains of 23-year-old Sherry Morrow were discovered in a shallow grave near the Nick River. Floth believed that all 3 women had been murdered by the same perpetrator. Floth reached out to FBI Special Agent John Douglas for help in creating a profile of the killer based on the 3 recovered bodies. Douglas believed the killer was likely an experienced hunter, had low self-esteem, and a history of being rejected by women. He also thought the killer might keep souvenirs from his victims, like jewelry, and possibly had a stutter. Using this profile, Floth focused on potential suspects and eventually identified Hansen, who matched the profile and owned a plane. With the help of Paulson's statement and Douglas's profile, Florida and the Anchorage Police Department, APD, took action. They got a warrant to search Hansen's plane, vehicles, and home. On October 27, 1983, the search began, and investigators made some shocking discoveries. In Hansen's attic, they found a hidden stash of firearms, including a .223 caliber Ruger Mini 14 semi-automatic rifle. They also found jewelry that belonged to some of the missing women. Behind Hansen's bed headboard, they discovered an aeronautical chart. This chart had 37 small X marks on it. Many of these marks matched places where bodies of victims had already been found. Later, other bodies were discovered at the locations marked on Hansen's map. Celia Beth Van Zanten, who was 18 years old, was last seen on December 22, 1971, while heading to a nearby supermarket. Her body was discovered on December 25, 1971, near Chugach State Park, Anchorage, in a deep ravine. She had been stabbed in the chest, bound, sexually assaulted, and thrown into the ravine while still alive. She died from the cold. Forensic evidence revealed that she had tried to escape from the ravine, but was unsuccessful due to being tied up. Hansen was suspected because an X mark appeared on his map, but he denied being involved. Megan Siobhan Emmerich, 17, disappeared on July 7, 1973, after leaving the Seward School Center dormitory laundry room, leaving all her personal belongings behind. After 3 days of searching, her roommate reported her missing to the police. Hansen denied killing Megan, but admitted that he was in Seward on the day she went missing. His aircraft map had an X mark in the Seward area. Hansen later told a former inmate that he took Megan to a remote cabin where he killed her and buried her. Mary Kathleen Thill, 22 years old, was dropped off by a friend outside a local bakery on July 5, 1975. She was seen between 1:30 and 2 p.m. near a waterfall on Lowell Point Road. After that, she was never seen or heard from again. Hansen admitted that he was in Seward when Mary disappeared, but he denied killing her. The presence of an X mark on his aviation chart near Resurrection Bay raised further suspicion. The body of Eklutna Annie was found on July 21, 1980. Her remains were buried near a power line, about a mile south of South Eklutna Lake Road. Suspicion: Hansen admitted that he stabbed her in the back because she tried to escape from his vehicle. He stated that she was either a topless dancer or a prostitute, and she was his first murder victim. When her body was discovered, most of it had been consumed by animals. Hansen claimed that she might have come from Kodiak, Alaska, but the police believed she might have been from California. Joanne Messina, 24 years old, went missing on May 19, 1980, from Seward, Alaska. Joanne had dinner with Hansen and then offered sexual services in exchange for money. Hansen refused to pay and also refused to let her go. He took her and her dog to a remote area near the Snow River, where he attacked her with a .22 caliber revolver, shooting her and killing the dog as well. He discarded Joanne's body in a nearby gravel pit and threw her belongings and the dog's body into the woods. He also threw the gun into the Snow River. Her body was found on July 8, 1980, in a severely decomposed state, having been ravaged by wild animals. Roxane Eastland, 24 years old, went missing on June 28, 1980, from Anchorage, Alaska. Roxane was staying with her boyfriend at a budget motel. She was supposed to meet a man in the downtown area but was never seen again. Hansen confessed to her murder, but her body was never found. Lisa Futrell, 41 years old, went missing on September 6, 1980, from Anchorage, Alaska. Lisa met Hansen at the club where she worked. After her shift on September 7th, she did not return home. Her body was found buried near a gravel pit on May 9, 1984, near the southern part of the former Nick Arm Bridge. Sherry Morrow, 23 years old, went missing on November 17, 1981. Sherry, a topless dancer, was on her way to meet a photographer who promised her $300 in exchange for nude photos. She was never seen again. Her body was found on September 12, 1982, by the banks of the Nick River. She had 3 gunshot wounds to her back, and nearby were spent shell casings from a .2 .23 Ruger Mini 14 rifle. Although her body was fully clothed, there were no bullet marks on her clothes, suggesting she was stripped before being shot and then reclothed and buried after death. Andrea Mona Fish Altieri was 24 years old. She went missing on December 22, 1981, from Anchorage, Alaska. Andrea had boarded a taxi to meet a man where she was supposed to do a photo shoot and exotic dancing, but she was never seen again. Authorities found some of Andrea's belongings, including her fish necklace, at Hansen's home. Hansen confessed that he had kidnapped Andrea, blindfolded her, handcuffed her, and then shot and killed her with a .22 Browning pistol. He then disposed of her body by placing it in a duffel bag, burying it with dirt, and throwing it into the Nick River. Her body was never found. Sue Luna was 23 years old. She went missing on May 26, 1982. Sue had agreed to a $300 photo shoot with a nightclub client and met with Hansen. The next day, she was never heard from again. Hansen kidnapped her, murdered her, and buried her in the Kenai River. Her body was found on April 24, 1984. Hansen confessed that he had forced Sue to run naked through the woods, then hunted her like an animal and shot her to death. Robin Pelkey was 19 years old. She went missing on July 19, 1983, from Anchorage, Alaska. Her partial remains were found on April 25, 1984, near Horseshoe Lake, Palmer, Alaska. She had been stabbed and shot to death. Initially known as Horseshoe Harriet, her identity was confirmed through forensic genealogy in October 2021. It remains unclear whether she was involved in sex work. DeLynn Sugar. Renee Frey was 22 years old. She went missing in March 1983. Her body was found on August 20, 1985, on a sandbar in the Nick River, and she was buried as Jane Doe. In 1989, her identity was confirmed when an Alaska state trooper recognized her jewelry from the case file. Cause of death: Hansen abducted and killed her. Paula Goulding was 30 years old. She went missing on April 25, 1983. Hansen abducted her, and after an argument, he shot and killed her with a .223 rifle. Her body was found on September 2, 1983, buried in a shallow grave near the Kenai River. There were wounds on her back, and her clothes hadn't been changed, suggesting that she may have been shot while naked and then dressed before being buried. Malai Larson was 28 years old. She went missing on July 10, 1981, in Anchorage, Alaska. Her body was found on April 24, 1984, near a parking lot close to the Kinnick Arm Bridge. Teresa Watson was 22 years old. She went missing on March 25, 1983. Teresa Watson told her roommate that she was going to meet a man for $300. Hansen kidnapped and murdered her near Scenic Lake. Due to the ground freezing, Hansen was unable to bury her and left her body behind. Her body was discovered on April 26, 1984. Angela Lynn Feddern was 24 years old. Angela, a nightclub dancer, was last seen on 4th Avenue in Anchorage in February 1983. She wasn't reported missing until May. Hansen kidnapped and murdered her. Her body was discovered on April 26, 1984, near a small lake close to Figure 8 Lake. Tamara Tommy Peterson was 20 years old. Tommy, a nightclub dancer in Anchorage, spoke to her family for the last time on August 7, 1982, and mentioned that she had been offered money for a photography session. Hansen kidnapped and murdered her. After Hansen's confession, her body was discovered on April 29, 1984, approximately 1.5 miles from Old Kenai Bridge. Once arrested, Hansen was charged with assault, kidnapping, multiple weapons offenses, theft, and insurance fraud. Hansen made a deal with the authorities after ballistics tests showed that bullets found at crime scenes matched those from his rifle. He pleaded guilty to the murders of 4 women, Morrow, Messina, Goulding, and Eklutna Annie, for which the police had solid evidence. In exchange, he agreed to serve his sentence in a federal prison and avoid media coverage. As part of the deal, Hansen also agreed to help the police understand the markings on his aviation map and to help locate the bodies of his victims. He confirmed the police's theory on how he kidnapped the women adding that sometimes he would release a victim if she convinced him she wouldn't report him. Hansen also mentioned that he began killing in the early 1970s. Hansen helped investigators by showing them 17 grave sites in south-central Alaska, 12 of which were unknown to the police. However, there were still some marks on his map that he refused to reveal, including 3 marks near Resurrection Bay, close to Seward. Authorities believe that 2 of these marks could be the graves of Mary Thill and Megan Emmerich, but Hansen denied killing them. The police were able to dig up the remains of 12 victims out of an estimated 21 to 37 victims. These remains were then returned to their families. Hansen was sentenced to 461 years in prison without the chance of parole. He was first sent to the United States Penitentiary in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. In 1988, he was moved back to Alaska and briefly held at the Lemon Creek Correctional Center in Juneau. Later, he was transferred to the Spring Creek Correctional Center in Seward. In May 2014, he was moved to the Anchorage Correctional Complex because of health problems. Hansen died on August 21, 2014, at the age of 75, due to natural causes related to ongoing health issues at the Alaska Regional Hospital in Anchorage.